Hello, my name is Kofman. I'm an Israeli-Australian writer. I'm an author and editor of 7 books. My first 3 books are fiction. I wrote them in Hebrew and they were published in Israel. And since I arrived in Australia 20 years ago, I began writing in English and I wrote 2 memoirs, Dangerous Bride and Imperfect, which is my recent one. It's a book that was published last year, and this is the book I'll be talking about today. I also edited 2 anthologies, one called Rebellious Daughters, which I co-edited with Maria Katsonis, and the other anthology is called Split, and they all feature known Australian writers. And the anthologies of memoir. So as you can see, since I moved to English, memoir became my preferred genre, although this can change too. I kind of tend not to be very monogamous to any genre. I write poetry as well. But today I'm going to talk to you about Imperfect, which is a bit of a strange book. So it's called memoir, but it's really kind of a hybrid work of creative nonfiction. Basically, every time I write a book to answer some question I want to generally understand. I never write to kind of teach anybody anything, or I don't write about things I already know because it feels boring to me and unnecessary. And then I think the book comes out didactic if you come from this sort of perspective to writing. So when I was thinking about writing Imperfect, I wanted to answer 2 questions. One is I was very interested to understand how can what we look like, our appearance, and as a shortcut I'll say body, how can our body shape our life? Because I've always strongly believed that even though we say all these nice things such as don't judge book by the cover, beauty is skin deep, etc., I do believe that the way I look, especially my scars, and you can see one of my scars here, I've got lots of scars. I believe that my scars have affected the way I live my life, how I felt about myself, of course, but also what kind of choices I made, what kind of options were available to me. For example, I always wanted to try my luck in acting, but when you have a body full of scars, especially if you're a woman, but for anybody really, it's quite problematic to try and go into acting where you often are required to expose your body. And I also believe that my scars and other people's appearances also shape our personality even. So for example, I mean, there's a lot of ways in how our appearance can affect who we are. But for example, because I have a lot of scars and I grew up with them since my young years, I often hid them because I felt they were socially unacceptable. I felt ashamed to have scars, and of course I wanted to look beautiful. So because I hid my scars so much physically, but also often did not even say to anybody that I have scars, I learned to be secretive about them. So this sort of secretiveness, I believe, also extended to my other areas of life. And I became secretive in many other ways. And I think writing is partly also my battle with the secretiveness, because ironically, or maybe very logically, I end up writing a lot about my life in ways that I think are quite candid. I mean, for example, the memoir I wrote before Imperfect called The Dangerous Bride was a story of my non-monogamous love affairs, which is, quite a candid topic for somebody secretive to address. But back to Imperfect. So my first question was, how can bodies impact our lives? And the second question was, if the way the bodies shape our lives is not in line with our designs, what can we do about it? Now, to answer these 2 questions, I did whatever I could. This is why I call my work hybrid creative nonfiction book. So I looked at books, at the philosophy of body, at the history, how historically we have looked at bodies and what kind of assumptions we made about them. I read a lot of psychological studies and sociological studies about beauty, about disfigurements, about the body generally, and many other its manifestations. Perhaps even more interestingly, I went and interviewed lots of people for 10 years. I did my research. I traveled all around Australia. I even talked to people from overseas as well. And I've spoken to people who have very different types of bodies, very beautiful people, people who considered by our norms what I call ironically imperfect. So people who kind of don't adhere to social norms. So I talk to people like me who have scars. I talk to people with dwarfism, people with albinism, etc., etc. I've talked to people who are quite large in their bodies or people who are very tall. And really, the more I sort of thought about it, the more research I did, the more conversations, informal conversations as well, I had with people about the body, the more my sense grew that it doesn't matter if we kind of deviate from the norm by being very beautiful or very so-called not normal in some ways in our body shape. It doesn't matter, even if we look very normative, very passable, or whatever words we may use, even then what we look like can really affect what we like. Because if you're somebody who enters a room and nobody even notices you, or if you're somebody who looks like many other people, this can also impact your personality in some ways. And still, Imperfect is usually discussed as a memoir. That's how it is sold also in bookshops. And this is because what ties my quest is the story of my own body. Now, I once, when I was when I was 20, I published my first book, which was a novel. Surprise, surprise, it was called Scars. And it was really fictionalized account of what happened to me. It also was a very bad novel. I learned then that I shouldn't have started so early. But anyway, when that book came out, when I was working on that book with the editor said to me at the time, the events you describe here are not plausible. And he was right. In fiction, they were not plausible, but they really happened to me. And so in Imperfect, I could finally properly tell my story of how I received all my scars. So I was born with cognitive defects in my heart. And until I was about 8, nobody even knew if I'll survive or die. And that sort of really, this very early sense of my own mortality also, I think, shaped me in many ways. And scars are testimony. They are marks that remind me about that sense of mortality that I received so early. But then I had several surgeries too, and my heart was repaired and I was fine, even though I was operated on in the Soviet Union under very dire conditions when it was even hard to find a sober surgeon to operate on me. And even though my heart defects were quite easy to fix with the technology and the quality of stuff in the Soviet Union those times, a lot of people like me died under the knife, but I didn't. So I survived all that. And this is where it becomes contrived now. So I was 8 years old when I had the surgery, and my mother, sort of course, understandably overprotected me after the surgery. She before and after, and I kind of grew up as the only child in my neighborhood in Odessa, where we lived then, which is in Ukraine. I grew up as the only child who were not allowed to go out anywhere without her parents. Everybody else kind of went out to our main street and had fun, and I was always at home, very resentful about it. And 2 years after my surgery, when I was 10 years old, one day, my mother then was pregnant with my first brother. I've got 3 of them because my 3 younger brothers, because of my heart condition, my parents didn't want to have any children until they knew that I will be okay. And once I was okay, they kind of bang, 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 just did 3 brothers. So my mother was heavily pregnant, and she said to me something that she probably regretted since a lot. She said, Lubachka, would you like to go and buy some sugar? I want to make a cake, but we ran out of sugar. And I was ecstatic. I was so excited because, gosh, my mother asked me to buy sugar to go by myself somewhere. That was the sound of freedom. So, of course, I went very, very thrilled for the first time at 10 years old, crossed the road by myself, crossed it in green light as my mother told me. Look, it did not look right or left, I think, as much as I probably should have, but still it was green light, and a bus ran me over. So that's pretty contrived, isn't it? So, and of course the bus driver, being in the Soviet Union in the 1980s, ran me over because he was tipsy. So he just basically did not notice me. And after this accident where my left leg was really damaged, I had quite a few more surgeries. So by the age of 11, I finished having scars. I acquired all my scars apart from the cesarean ones later. And I had lots of them, and I had lots of surgery. And I've always felt that those years, as difficult they were with all the hospitalizations and all the surgeries, I always felt they were very tough. But they were nothing compared to what came after, which was growing as a young woman with multiple scars on my body in a society that does not expect both basically physical perfection of women, and if not physical perfection, then at least kind of passable conformative appearance. And so this is really the fertile ground from which Imperfect arose. And I know I was supposed to do reading as well for this video, but I had so much to say and I only actually really got started. So I ran out of time to read from the book, but I think some of the stories that I just told you, they are in the book, just hopefully in a bit more articulate manner. So thank you for watching this video, and I'd love to talk to you about my book more in our Q&A session.